If a person was crucified, normally speaking, they didn't get a burial. That was part of the deal. Your body rotted or was eaten by birds on the cross. This was the normal deal. But because of certain sensibilities of the Jews, it seems like they've struck a deal with the Romans, so they were able to take the crucified bodies down before sunset so that they didn't curse the land. According to their law, that's what would happen. Nevertheless, a crucified criminal, in a sense, their body belonged to Rome. So Joseph of Arimathea, according to Mark, went into Pilate and negotiated for the body. Joseph was a secret disciple. From John's Gospel, we know that he was helped by Nicodemus, who was also a secret disciple. And these two men, fairly well off, part of the Jewish Sanhedrin, they would have been there when sentence of death was passed by the Jewish Sanhedrin on Jesus, but they would have voted against it. After the crucifixion, Joseph goes to Pilate and negotiates for the body, gets permission, and then Joseph and Nicodemus take the body down and they go into the grave, which was owned by Joseph, we know, and hadn't been used before. And they go into the grave, which is where they would have prepared the body and then buried Jesus in that grave, in Joseph's grave. Some of the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee were watching, and they saw this burial happening. There's no reason to even imagine that they knew Joseph and Nicodemus, because both those men were secret disciples. As far as they saw, two Jewish men took the body down off the cross and buried it in that grave. That's all they needed to know. They knew where the body was, and they went home knowing that it's usually their responsibility to prepare the body for burial by wrapping it with perfumes to keep the stench down. But the women knew that it was their job now to come back and finish the burial process off. Now, what actually happened on that resurrection morning? It's good that we've got 4 Gospels, because we can piece the account together. 3 women went to the tomb that morning. There was Mary Magdalene, Jesus' friend. There was Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and we know that this was Jesus' auntie. And the third woman was Salome, who was the mother of James and John, the wife of Zebedee. They go to the tomb first thing in the morning. Now, when they get there, they see that the stone's already rolled away. Now, at that point, Mary Magdalene decides to go back and tell the disciples what's happened. The other 2 women, Auntie Mary and Salome, enter the tomb and they see an angel, a young man, Mark says, sitting there, who tells them, "What are you doing here? Jesus is risen." And he also says, "Go and tell the disciples that you will see Jesus in Galilee." So they have an appearance of an angel and they realise that the body's gone. Mark tells us this scared the life out of them, and they run away from the tomb and they don't say anything to anyone. Now, that implies there was someone to say something to if they wanted to, but they didn't. Who are these people? Well, this is Sunday, the first day of the week. They've gone back into the city where everybody's setting up their market stalls for the day. All these sort of passerbys, the women would have walked past, traumatised, shocked. They didn't say anything to anybody. They were just trying to work out what had gone on. What did they do next? Well, we know the angel told them to go back and report to the disciples, so that's where they're going. And from Luke's account, they eventually get back there and they tell the story. Now, Mary Magdalene, of course, has already got back there, and she's already told Peter that the stone had rolled away. Now Peter hears these 2 older women reporting what they'd seen as well. We read in Luke's account that the disciples felt like what they were saying was nonsense. But the next thing that Luke tells us is that Peter gets up and goes to check it out for himself. And we see the same story in John's Gospel. Only John also tells us that he got up and went with Peter as well. So Peter and John rush back to the tomb, check it out for themselves, find out that the tomb is empty, and they go home wondering what's gone on. Now, we also learn from John's Gospel that Mary Magdalene went with them, or followed those 2 men, and she still doesn't know what's going on, even though she'd seen the stone rolled away early in the morning. Now she doesn't know. She's left there, she's crying outside the grave, and Jesus comes along and appears to her. So she becomes the first witness of the resurrected Jesus. It's always been a surprise for people to have Mark finishing where it does in Mark chapter 16, verse 8. where the final verse is that the women were afraid, and so because they were afraid they said nothing to anybody. It's a really good place to end for the gospel, because it's almost like, you know, we know what they should have done. They should have talked about Jesus, the one who'd risen from the dead. The Son of Man has come to power. The kingdom of God is just around the corner because of that resurrection event. We know that there's plenty that they could have said, but they didn't. And so we sort of get the sense they didn't do the right thing. However, we're very sympathetic for them, because we understand what it is not to speak when we should be speaking. We understand what it is to be silent when we should be speaking about these great things. So we're sympathetic towards them. And it's almost like that ending throws the story over to the reader to finish off, you know, and say, well, okay, the women didn't say anything about the resurrection, what are you going to do?